Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. I'm Sister Charlene Muhammad. Welcome to Liberated Sisters in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. We're recording live right here in Leimert Park at Mars Media Studios. Today's show, Blacks, U.S., Politics, and Zimbabwe. We're speaking to three great guests about politics in the diaspora. Our show today features Dr. Gerald Horne. He is Professor of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. Our dear sister in studio, Sister Moya Mzuri. She is Central Committee member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And Brian E. Muhammad, staff writer, my colleague, my brother, right from the Final Call newspaper. And so thank you for being with us here on Liberated Sisters today. And we will return with our beautiful guest, our stellar guest. But right now, today's Liberated Sisters Justice Report. This Justice Report comes straight, no chaser.
40 years ago, I was awakened from a deep sleep after the so-called death of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. His work destroyed. His name buried. His people back to the old habits that we had once forsaken. And after about 30 months, I decided I must make an effort to rebuild his work. Yes, sir. So in September of 1977, I decided to rebuild the work of Elijah Muhammad and reprove to you who had rejected him and to a government that persecuted him that he had the best solution for the ever-growing toxic relationship between black and white. So this message is not from Louis Farrakhan. This message is from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad through Louis Farrakhan. And it is a final warning to the government and people of the United States of America. It is a final call to black people that you must change the way you think and the way you act, because the time has arrived for you to do better and be better, or suffer the chastisement of God until you submit your will. It's written in the Bible, and I say this to our president. It is written that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus the Christ is Lord. Yes, sir. I represent that Jesus that Christ that you have been longing for and looking for.
That is the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. That clip is taken from his November 16th address, a message, a final warning to President Donald Trump. We're going to have two more excerpts that we want to share with you. And as our sister engineer gets that ready, I want to ask you, Sister Moya, if you could just comment a little bit about that. And we're going to be bringing in Dr. Gerald Horne and as well Brian Muhammad after we hear the next two clips to take us into the upheaval that's taking place in Zimbabwe in the context of world politics. But for right now, I want you to, as we get ready with the other clips, just comment about that message from Minister Farrakhan briefly, Sister Moya.
Yes, it was very moving because I remember 1976 and 1977, and he is right that there was a void in the community. And when the minister started rebuilding the Nation of Islam, people started coming back to the message. And, there was this tension between the message of Malcolm and the message, of the general community. Mm-hmm. But he brought all of those things together. And he revived this energy that also revived this movement even around Malcolm, because it was the importance and the strength of unity and organization and us coming together. And I think the strength of us coming together and being a power in our own community, in our own nation, is the message that we can deal with the European, but only when we're on an equal footing, only when we come together to build our own nation.
Thank you.
And that was his power. That was his powerful message.
Thank you. Was and is, I might say. And so I think the other clip is ready, and we're going to continue on. Thanks for that commentary. And Dr. Horne and Brother Brian, stay right there. We will be coming to you. Here's Minister Farrakhan.
You hate him. You call him a weak president. Because he's not like you, Mr. Trump. And he's not like his predecessors. He is like Jonah, who was a reluctant prophet. Barack Obama was reluctant to be the type of wicked man that your presidents are, have been, and like you said, let's take the oil. See, that's not presidential. The presidents would say, let's see if we can make a deal and give them money for their oil because we really want it all. That's presidential. We'll send our Secretary of State. He's such a diplomat. But you, Mr. Trump, we'll take the oil. You remember? And with Stephanopoulos on ABC, we'll bomb the hell out of them. See, Mr. Trump is real. He is what he is. Now, you either got to see him as he is, because all the rest of them were vampires that looked good in the day, but when night came, you know. Mr. Trump, and I say this to my brother Barack, you really tried to make America better. Couldn't succeed. Because the moment you went overseas and started talking about the mistakes that America has made, Romney and the Republicans said, look at him. He's over there apologizing. Mr. Trump, more than an apology is needed.
Okay. A message to Donald Trump. That's
Yes.
the second of one more clip we're going to play, 3 clips. But as we get that third clips together, Sister Moya, and again, the brothers are going to come and chime in. And all of this is in the context, I really absolutely believe, of what's taking place in terms of Zimbabwe today. But your thoughts on that?
I think that, he made a really solid point when he talked about and I can only call them what they are. He said they're vampires, but the imperialist countries, when these imperialists decide to go in, they go in and they just say, we want to take it. But the reality in certain parts of Africa, especially those countries that fought for their liberation, didn't negotiate, they fought for their liberation. That whole Southern Africa region, Mozambique, Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, they fought for their liberation. And so you have to try to go in another way. And so the way they're going in today is they're creating the opposition parties. And they're saying you have to depose and unseat President Mugabe. And once you do that, and in fact, Rory Stewart, who is the UK ambassador for Africa, representing the UK, he said, if you depose Mugabe, Britain and the United States and the international community will have money for you to help uplift the Zimbabwe economy. So as long as you can promise fair and free elections and, just giving that whole kind of a package deal of what we require, because we really want to come back in and we realize we can't come in because everyone comments, this isn't your traditional coup.
We're going to get into, Sister Moya's about to take it there.
Okay.
Let's see if we're ready to go with that last one. Okay, great. Here's Minister Farrakhan, the Justice Report. Okay, we're going to get that ready.
Okay.
So perhaps maybe we can come back in with it after the calendar. But right now, I think you've at least gotten excerpts to understand the context of what we're dealing with here, not just in the U.S., but the world. But that was a final message, is a final message to President Trump. You can get that full message in its entirety at finalcall.com, store.finalcall.com, and of course the latest coverage of that at finalcall.com, the Final Call newspaper's cover story. So here we go. Let's bring in Dr. Gerald Horne and Brian Muhammad to the discussion. And thank you as well. We have our beautiful sister Moya right here with us. Dr. Horne, can you hear us?
I hear you now.
Thank you so much for being patient with us as we shared our Liberated Sisters Justice Report. How about you, Brother Brian? And Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Brother Brian?
Wa alaikum salam. I can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful.
I hope you can hear me good.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
If you can turn your phone up a little bit, that would be great, but we certainly can hear you. So thank you so much. Dr. Horne, I want you to take us further into the discussion that Sister Moya began in terms of what's happening with Zimbabwe. Why does this concern us? We should be watching this very closely here in the U.S. and the diaspora.
Well, I think it should concern us because what is unfolding in Zimbabwe is a crisis involving a state that originally was based on settler colonialism. I'm talking about during the Rhodesian period, which lasts up until 1980. In the United States, as we know, this is a state also based upon settler colonialism as well. It's the number one settler colonial state on planet Earth. And there are many parallels between the history of Zimbabwe and the history of the United States that I pointed out in my book, which was written after I'd lived in Zimbabwe some years ago. The immediate crisis was triggered by the sacking of the deputy president, Emerson Mnangagwa, by the president, Robert Mugabe. And according to press reports that I just monitored a few moments ago, he's just resigned. That is to say, Mr. Mugabe apparently has just resigned. And this caused unrest, or it triggered unrest within the military, which then a few days ago put Mr. Mugabe and his spouse under detention and also did the same with some of his ministers as well, which led to a mass demonstration in Harare on Saturday and the stripping of Mr. Mugabe's post as head of the party on Sunday and an attempt to impeach him on Tuesday, today. That's the essence of the crisis.
Wow. Dr. Horne, please give us the title of your book and let people know how that they can get that. I want to do that right now.
Well, the book is From the Barrel of a Gun, the United States and the War Against Zimbabwe, 1965 to 1980. It's University of North Carolina Press, but it's available all over the place since it's an academic press. And then, of course, it was published in Zimbabwe, too. If any of you have any listeners there, I know it's you can go out to the airport and you can get it there at the Harare International Airport.
Thank you so much. And make sure to just stay right there, jump in as you see fit. Brother Brian Muhammad is our staff writer in the Carolinas, right? And Brother Brian, you just, right now today, your article has been published in the Final Call newspaper. You just wrote about what's taking place in Zimbabwe. Give us some insight into what you share in your story.
Well, I mean, I was looking at the dynamics of this political crisis there and really how it came about, you know, with the, as Dr. Horne just mentioned, the firing or the sacking of the vice president appears to be what triggered this move by the military to take control of the country. And they were very careful not to call it a coup. In fact, you know, it was almost like watching something out of Hollywood, you know, in the sense that, you know, it appears to be a coup, but we can't call it a coup because of the dynamics of, you know, of the international bodies who they will need moving forward. You know, in a post-Mugabe government, they will need at least they think that they need the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and certainly the regional groupings there, SADC, and also the African Union, who by mandate doesn't recognize governments that come in by coup. So in the military's position, you know, they were very clear, at least to me, it appeared that their problem wasn't Mugabe personally. They felt that he has been in a long time. He has been head of the country since the time of liberation, and they want something different, you know. They want something different. So, but they made it plain that they themselves would do a purge of what they saw as corrupt elements within the ZANU-PF government, which is the party that up until Sunday President Mugabe led. And so it's some dynamics going on where it's not, if it is a coup, it's not your normal coup where you see bloodshed and you see, you know, and you have people who is backing up off of that language. But if it's a coup, we need to treat it as just that, because whenever the military steps in, even if they come in with the support of the people, social support of the people, you know, to many people that care about human rights, it's just problematic.
Yes,
you know?
Sir. Wow. Sister Moya, jump in. So I'm hearing you all say that President Mugabe was not the problem. People around him were the problem. And so the people there wanted to change. But Mugabe wasn't working. That's what I'm hearing you all say.
Well,
Sister Moya.
I think that there are probably some additional issues. You know, his wife, Grace, has been mentioned.
Yes.
That she was positioning herself, sacking the VP was a way to move her into position to eventually, take the seat and sort of inherit the reins.
And that angered the military.
I think that angered not just the military, but not only the military, but also the veterans.
Okay.
Because the veterans of Zimbabwe have been a part of this core group that has supported, as well as ZANU-PF, but the veterans have been a part of the support. And by this power shifting that's happened, I think there was some influence that, that Grace Mugabe had influence over President Mugabe. And I think that, once you bring in other elements and you don't stick to the collective process, consultation process, engaging, there's a central committee, there's a parliament, if you're honoring the Constitution, as long as you start going outside of that and venturing out, there's going to be struggle. And I think that there's some ideological, we know that there are neo-colonialist elements all throughout Africa. You have U.S. forces throughout Africa meeting with heads of military. In fact, Dr. Bunting, we had a meeting Friday, and he said when he was in Tanzania a couple of months ago, he saw U.S. military with the emblem on their shirts, and they were meeting with all heads of Africa's military except for 3 countries that refused to be there. And so, as we know, the U.S. military is not just in Niger. They're throughout Africa. They've been trying to push having a presence, and that presence means any resistant countries that are not letting them come in and go back and recolonize Africa. They're going to create this instability. So I think they have been working on breaking down the collective democracy inside of Zimbabwe for decades. They've been causing the economic unrest. We can talk about the Lancaster agreement that was not honored by Britain and America that was supposed to pay Zimbabwe back for the lands that they would have to take from the Europeans that were holding the lands of the people and giving them back to the veterans, giving them back to the people. So there's economic, just like with Cuba, there's instability that is created by the imperialists, but they want to make it seem like it's all internal. It's all our chaos.
Yeah. Dr. Horne, your comments about that, and take us further.
Well, I think that there are a couple points I'd like to make. First of all, Grace Mugabe has been mentioned. The point there is that until recently, she was a traditional kind of first lady, that is to say, cutting ribbons and all the rest. You may recall that she was married to Mr. Mugabe in 1996, his second spouse, and also her second marriage as well. But the problem in Zimbabwe, and I saw this when I was there, is that oftentimes when a husband passes away, the relatives of the husband, of the deceased husband, come into the household and literally place the surviving widow on the streets. That's part of customary tradition, I'm afraid. And I do suspect that given the fact that she's in her early 50s and he's in his early 90s, that she may have had some concern about what would befall her and her sons after Mr. Mugabe passed from the scene. In any case, she has been a political actor, and a lot of the animosity has been directed towards her, sadly enough. The second point I would make is that there's been a certain amount of factionalism within the leadership of the ruling party. Some of this stems from the fact that, as you may recall, during the Liberation War, there were actually 2 movements, the Zimbabwe African National Union, embodied by Robert Mugabe, and the Zimbabwe African People's Union, embodied by Joshua Nkomo, now deceased. 30 years ago, in 1987, there was a merger of these 2 parties, but in some ways the merger resulting in ZANU-PF helped to introduce conflicting tendencies into the leadership that were difficult to resolve, and it made it difficult to develop a succession plan. That is to say, who would succeed Mr. Mugabe? And there was a certain kind of paralysis. And then with Mrs. Mugabe stepping into the fray, that helped to upset things further. And I should also say that the military has extensive economic interests in Zimbabwe, just like the military in Egypt has extensive economic interests, and militaries globally tend to do so. And I'm sure that they felt that a new broom would sweep clean, as the saying goes. and that some of their interests might be jeopardized with the change in leadership, particularly Grace Mugabe. And then the other factor I would mention that helps to generate mass discontent are the sanctions slapped on Zimbabwe 15 to 16 years ago in the wake of the land reform, that is to say, seeking redistribution of the land from the European minority farmers. And that led to sanctions, which helped to introduce hyperinflation. To give you an example of hyperinflation, you go to a bar, you order a beer for 100,000 Zim dollars. By the time you finish drinking, you have to pay 250,000 Zim dollars. Now, that's the kind of hyperinflation that was driving discontent and inevitably drove people into the streets this past Saturday.
Wow. Brother Brian. Thank you, Dr. Horne. Brother Brian.
Yeah, and this is why, we have to look at how this came about, because all of these factors, you look at, the role of these sanctions, which was designed, I don't care how they cut it. They always put a noble face on, this is to punish, rogue leaders and governments that we don't, but you are hurting the people in hopes that
creating
you manufacture dissatisfaction that they will move against their leaders, and so was Mugabe and the ruling party perfect rulers? No, not by no stretch of the imagination, but we have to recognize what was manufactured, and this is why this whole debate about whether it was a coup and that whole confusion is important to note, because where under noble terms they were pushed to say, well, we don't recognize people who come to power in that way. Okay, it wasn't done traditionally by the gun, so to speak, but it was an overthrow anyway. But because of the dynamics of the U.S. and these outside entities that can benefit moving forward, they will look the other way. Dr. Horne brought up the military interest in economics in Egypt. It was the same thing. When their up to that point friend Mubarak was overthrown, America did not want to call that a military coup, although there was elements of the military manipulating legitimate dissatisfaction of the people, and through that door had a coup. But America still maneuvered to move forward with it. The African Union did not dismiss Egypt. Look at what happened in Libya to Muammar Gaddafi. They backed a coup and they fostered these opposition elements that and who were successful, and they would not have been successful if they did not have the express backing of these outside forces through NATO to perform a coup. But the African Union and the rest did not back up off of Libya and say, well, no, until you deal with how you came to power, we're not going to recognize. They recognized them and moved forward. So this, to me, again, this is not to dismiss any criticism that people may have of Mugabe's leadership, or the party's leadership, but we have to look at the dynamics. And then the vice president, who was fired, and then Sunday was voted back into the party and was given the chairmanship of, if you will, of the party, which now positions him to lead after Mugabe in perhaps a transitional government until the elections next year. But from what I understand, and maybe Dr. Horne or the sister can shed more light on this individual's politics, he's very much connected to the World Bank and International Monetary Fund as a way to mitigate the economic problems of Zimbabwe. So to me, it's problematic. It's very problematic.
Thank you for that, Brother Brian. What we'll do, Dr. Horne, Sister Moya, if you could remember that we asked you to weigh in. I would like to hear that too. We're going to do that right after I make a quick announcement for Liberated Sisters, and then we'll take a quick break, and I want you to come back in and talk about that. So our Liberated Sisters calendar report today is going to really come out of the Final Call newspaper, because it's that time. We're in the holiday spending time, and so we say no justice, no profit, as not spending becomes weapon for justice. This is the Final Call newspaper, not one dime. I just want to read a lead for you, but you can go to finalcall.com. Protesters demonstrate. Look, this is Black Friday shopping, we know. Find someplace else besides the mainstream corporate entities that we know are really doing us in. There's the blackmall.com, many places across the country, many across the world. Our people, our activists are doing this. They're creating alternatives, and they're there, they're viable, and they're quality, and they're affordable. And so Thanksgiving weekend has traditionally been the kickoff to the holiday shopping season. We know that. I would like to say it's coming a little bit earlier these days. But in recent years, the ongoing fight for justice in the face of rampant police brutality has led to economic boycotts across the country. So let's remember, this is not asking or leading people to say don't shop just because we don't want to, but there's a reason. This is about Black, brown, and other poor life that's being decimated by police brutality. The movement to hashtag Boycott Black Friday, hashtag Boycott Black Friday, has made legions of Black people more selective about how much they spend and with whom they are spending. The anti-spending effort will continue this year, hoping to crash sales the Friday after Thanksgiving. We have right here in Los Angeles and throughout the country, Black Lives Matter has their activity with that. And so not one dime. That's at finalcall.com. You can read the rest of the story by our contributor, Rachel Muhammad. Thank you, Sister Rachel, for that article. Not one dime, finalcall.com. I also want to announce that Liberated Sisters is also heard on KPFK every second and fourth Saturday. That's 90.7 FM, kpfk.org. And also upcoming, we're going to be dealing right here at Morris Media Studios with the healthcare insurance issue. So we're going to have guests talking about single payer, talking about Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, what's that all about? And then, God willing, for our KPFK show this Saturday, we're going to have a special Thanksgiving show. Sister Yanaz Zaha, Lone Wolf, Muhammad, and others, God willing. That Keystone Pipeline, that Standing Rock was all about and is all about, has burst, we understand. And so we want to talk to them about that. So thank you so much for giving attention to Liberated Sisters Justice Report. Let's jump right back to the conversation. So Dr. Horne, Sister Moya, Brother Brian had posed a question to you both. Let's go with Sister Moya first, Dr. Horne, and then we'll come right to you.
I think that good points were made, and again, there is no country on this planet that is perfect, but there is a continent, and there is a country that always intercedes in the business of Africa as a continent, and that's Europe and America, European interests. And so we find that although the conditions for struggle, because we have to give respect to the fact that it's very few heads of state that was in the bush for the liberation of the nation, like President Mugabe. He was in the bush with these brothers, with the veterans. He was in the bush leading ZANU, and the unity of ZANU and ZAPU in creating ZANU-PF and bringing, the nation and taking back Rhodesia, as Mama Nehanda started the first Shimurenga, taking back our land for African people, incensed Europe, incensed Britain, and they have never stopped since then, just like with Cuba, just like with many other countries in Africa and throughout the world. And so there is a deliberate targeted struggle for these imperialist nations to come back and find their place, because capitalism is dying. And without those natural resources, without that labor, without that income that they get from these former colonies, they will vanquish. So we built them. Unity can destroy them. And there's a unity amongst, MPLA. There's a unity amongst Frelimo. There was a unity amongst ZANU, ANC, PAC, and these various other entities. Even the relationship between Gaddafi and President Mugabe. There was a unity there that incensed these imperialists. Yeah. And so we have to acknowledge their hands in it. And to our brothers and sisters in Zimbabwe, and we have a close relationship, our party with ZANU and with the Youth League, that we say, you're not going to find the solution looking outside. You have to look inside. We have to have unity, regional unity, unity within the country. Africa needs to unify and find solutions within itself and not these outsiders, because we're going to have contradictions. Freedom ain't easy. Liberation ain't easy. But we can say you have to give respect that this change of power, however we want to title it, was done bloodlessly. It was done with respect for the leadership, with respect and honor for Brother Mugabe. And it was done with, I would say, relative calm in terms of ZANU-PF. I mean, the people, you see the uprisings and stuff, but you also see there was a respect between the military and ZANU-PF and the masses of the people. And so we have to say there's something a little higher in terms of the political unity and consciousness of the people of Zimbabwe. And the reality that Southern Africa as itself, with Mozambique, Angola, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, the unity that exists there, the imperialists just can't come in like they did with Libya. This is a little bit different. And so we have to acknowledge the power of African unity and the importance in this instance.
A symbol and a signal. Dr. Horne.
Well, let me be brief because, as I said beforehand, I'm going to have to duck out in a few minutes.
Okay. First
of all, there's a party congress on December 12th, and presumably this apparent choice of Emerson Mnangagwa, the former deputy president, will be ratified as head of the party, and I assume he'll become the next leader. He's 75 years old, as you may know, and therefore the succession issue still is on the table. That is to say, what faction or what leader will be in line to replace him once nature takes its course. Also, I think that the military and the leadership are going to have to deal with this question that they put on the table, which is that you need to have Liberation War credentials in order to serve in State House. That was one of the knocks against Grace Mugabe, who's only in her early 50s, which means that she would have been a teenager in 1980. Unless they're trying to set up a gerontocracy, a sort of a rule by the elderly, it'll basically rule out anybody under 60, quite frankly. And so they're going to have to grapple with that particular contradiction. Yeah. And finally, the situation in Zimbabwe is very fluid right now, and almost anything could happen. Those who are concerned about a reversal of land reform should be concerned, because there's going to be enormous pressure on this new regime. To a certain extent, they're on the back foot. There are going to be disgruntled elements, upset that Mr. Mugabe was dislodged. There will also be an impulse to go after Mr. Mugabe and Grace Mugabe. That is to say, to exact some sort of vengeance against them, to look at their accounts and all of the rest, and all of the problems of the country will be laid at their doorstep. And that kind of cycle is, I'm afraid to say, possible. But I think that on this side of the Atlantic, as has already been suggested, our focus should be on staying the hand of U.S. imperialism and keeping its grubby paws off of the nations of Southern Africa and Zimbabwe in particular.
Dr. Horne, take us out into the time for you to go, and we'll pick up the discussion, Brother Brian, Sister Moya, because he does have to leave early. So let's let you have the last 5 minutes just in terms of putting this in the context of what's happening here with blacks and politics in the U.S.
Well, one of the things that concerns me to try to link these two issues is that there was once a thriving solidarity movement, and I don't think it was inevitable that that movement would begin to shrivel, which I think it has shriveled. And I think that part of the cause for that, I think the cause is partially on the shoulders of our comrades and friends in Southern Africa and partially on our shoulders. Secondly, there is a kind of double standard, if you like, with regard to how some folks, not all, of course,
right,
in our community deal with these issues. That is to say, they look at Zimbabwe and they draw the inference that the comrades were too energetic in terms of pushing land reform, which then helped to drive the economy into the ditch. And then they go across the border to South Africa and they say the ANC has not been sufficiently energetic in terms of pushing redistribution and land reform. It seems to me you can't have it both ways. I mean, I think we need either A, consistent line, or B, keep our tight focus once again on Washington and monitoring its policies and its interference in the internal affairs of these countries, because as Zimbabwe has shown, they have exceedingly competent people in that country. As you know, the South African economy would probably grind to a halt, but for the fact that there are about 1 million Zimbabweans in South Africa at the wheels of the economy. It's probably the highest level of literacy on the African continent, one of the highest levels of literacy on planet Earth. And so I'm sure they may not necessarily need our sage counsel, particularly because they can look at our situation here and wonder, well, if we're so bright, what have we accomplished?
Shake their head.
So those are my final comments, I'm afraid.
Dr. Horne, thank you so much. I'm not afraid. Thank you so much for being with us here on Liberated Sisters. I know your time is valuable and you've lent it to us today. So thank you. And may God continue to bless you in everything that you do.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome, sir. Peace and blessings.
Peace.
Sister Moya. Brother Brian, how are you?
Good.
I mean, I just, again, my issue is just that, watching the slimy paws of Washington and these, and again, I have to do more research on the, the vice president or now head of the ZANU-PF party, because again, the feedback that I had gotten, and I have to verify it more, that he's more susceptible to these outside bodies involving themselves in, again, mitigating the tremendous economic problems of Zimbabwe. And to me, that is the doorway, in the entryway into Zimbabwe by these outside entities like the United States and Britain and so forth. And and to me, it's just problematic. And and I'm saying this because if like Libya, you had a strong leader, but you also had these outside forces fostering those on the periphery, just waiting a turn at, making their move. And I believe that perhaps this may be their move in Zimbabwe. Even though it came, even though it was smooth, it was, again, it was very respectful. And that's why the argument was whether it was a coup. And I guess my question would be, well, what is a coup and what is not a coup?
Let me look it up.
Right.
Keep going. Let's get that defined. Yeah, because a takeover is a takeover, blood or not. I know as we come to you, sister, you happen to have spoken to our dear brother, Abdul Akbar Muhammad, Nation of Islam International representative. What did he say? Brother Brian?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you. What did Brother Akbar share?
Well, I mean, again, he raised the contradiction of how these things are responded to. If it was a coup, he called it an alleged coup.
No.
You know, and he said that if it was, it, you know, again, normally the African Union and whatnot, and certainly SADC, you know, have a mandate within their constitutions, if you will, that they don't recognize governments that come to power in that way.
Right.
And he said that, you know, that there are exceptions with these international bodies. And he raised the point of Libya, and he raised the point of Egypt. You know, that when that took place in Libya, you know, there was no breakage in the relationship. They remained in the AU. This new government that was formed as a result of the overthrow. You know, and certainly, you know, Egypt was the same thing. There was no breakage. There was no debate on what. They just kept it moving. You see? And so will because of the Western disdain for President Mugabe, will it be the same thing in terms of looking the other way? If it was a coup, and maybe it's a moot point, because again, it seems like people are trying to move away from even dealing with whether it was or it wasn't. You know, even some in our conscious community, it's like nobody's raising that. It's like, okay, well, you know, nobody's killing no one, so there's no bloodshed. So just get up off of that.
Let's clear it.
You know.
Yes.
Let's clear the word, right? So from old French coup or cope, it's a blow, strike, a blow or a strike, right? From medieval Latin, it's a box on the ear, a cuff. Okay. From Greek, it's a sudden decisive act, short for coup d'etat. So you're right. You all are right. Blood. Okay. Let's ask Brother Mugabe and Sister Grace how they feel.
I mean, they could have waited.
Does it have to be violent?
Yeah, they could have waited until March next year when they were going to, you know, talk about having elections.
Yeah.
They could have waited until March. But to do it now, and to me, is this instigated internally, or they say with the sacking of the VP 13 days ago, you know, 14 days ago, that's when a lot of this, you know, came about. But again, with his posturing of himself, I think, you know, there's a couple things about what can we do? What stand should we have? I think it's important for African people throughout the diaspora and in Africa to stand in unity of peace and unity in Zimbabwe. That there should not be the kind of violence that Brother Horne was talking about against, the commander-in-chief at the time, President Mugabe.
Yeah, sweeping them.
Yes, we should be
everything.
calling for peace. We should be calling for unity. We should be sending out statements, political statements, calling for the unity and the peaceful transition, and asking ZANU-PF and the military to find unity and to keep. The other thing is keep U.S. out of Africa, keep Britain out of Africa, keep these imperialists out of our business, and let us resolve this as African people. So I think that we need to have a voice, maybe statement from, Mr. Farrakhan in the final call, statement to go to the, to ZANU-PF and to those in Zimbabwe calling for peace. We want to support you because we have to have faith. For me, the other part of it is these are the brothers and sisters that brought liberation to Zimbabwe, that kicked the Rhodesians out. We got to respect that history. I mean, we ain't been fighting, you know what I'm saying, weapon in hand and putting our blood on the line. Yeah. These brothers and sisters have. We have to respect that. You have to respect the unity that brings people together, that demands their land back.
And learn from it, right?
And learn from it, because even here as we talk about it, we want to, we can't just talk about our lives mattering. We have to talk about what power do we have? What rights can we declare for ourselves? What can we do? How can we feed and clothe ourselves?
To enforce that right.
Yeah, because, in Zimbabwe, ZANU had their politics, They had their gun and they had the hoe, because the hoe allowed you to dig and feed yourself and take care of yourself. So their primary weapons was their politics and their belief that Africa was for the African, their gun to defend themselves, and the hoe to feed themselves. We have to start thinking we can't be negotiating with people who are stealing from us. Yeah. We need land. We need our land back. We need the right and the responsibility to build our nation and to take care of ourselves and to defend ourselves. And with that kind of power, you can support other nations. You can support your people in other nations. Yeah. And so I think that we have to start thinking and learning from these examples in Zimbabwe and throughout Africa and the Caribbean.
If we're going to survive.
Puerto Rico, and all of these areas like Puerto Rico, I think they're realizing, what is the benefit of being a protectorate? We need to be independent.
Wow. As you join in, Brother Brian, I want to just mention as well, when we talk about this quote-unquote violence or bloodshed and coup, right? We know a lot. We hear that in domestic violence, the worst kind is by the mouth. It's verbal because it stays, right? Sometimes people say the wounds will heal, but it's that verbal. But go ahead, Brother Brian, and then we're going to come back to you, sister, to wrap up your closing comments. And Brother Brian, let's make that yours now. I'm not saying you have to make it short, but let's just go into yours now. Well, a little bit.
That's because, these moles would like to
no, sir. You're great. You're fine. You're welcome.
But I say this, we talk long but work long as well. So
yeah, but you're not talking long. You're good.
Yes.
Go ahead. Yeah.
But no, I what Sister just said was so important. Because we have to respect the history of struggle that brought independence to Zimbabwe and others. Because it's easy for us, some of us, to fight from a cultural standpoint. That so in the 1960s, it was enough for us to grow an afro and wear dashiki and put our fist in the air. That was enough because we were coming because of where we came from.
Right.
Total lack of consciousness to consciousness. But they were fighting for their land.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different level of struggle. And so, again, my question, is coming from the standpoint that, African tradition, we don't treat age like it's an albatross.
Yes.
You respect our elders.
Yes.
And the elders have a place to continue to guide and to give of themselves that we may move forward in continuity with their struggle. And so my whole thing is that what is the politics, not so much of the army, because I believe that the military, as President Mugabe said on Sunday in his speech, that he felt that they were coming from a sincere place,
Check that out.
But the person that they placed there, this former vice president, even though he was part of the liberation struggle, what is his politics today? And what is his connection to the West? What is his idea in terms of the involvement of the traditional enemies of Zimbabwe? Because if he's going to be a catalyst for that door to be open and continue to be open for them, then, again, to me, it's problematic. But as Sister said, we have to do our part from this side, in terms of encouraging the continuation of a peaceful transition, a most productive transition in terms of the government and the people there, and and stay connected to right principles. So
thank you.
That's where I'm gonna end it. Yes.
Thank you. And Brother Brian's article is in this edition of the Final Call newspaper, finalcall.com. Brother Brian, thank you for everything you do for our nation and our people. And thanks for your writing. And Brother Brian has a radio show that he also does. It's Global Peaks. So, Brother Brian, I'll let you go then. Assalamu alaikum and thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Walaikum salam.
Walaikum salam.
Sister Moya, let's have your wrap up on what he shared or what you want to share, closing remarks.
I think, in closing, as I said, and Brother Brian, says as well, is our role is that we need to stand in unity. And our Central Committee is working on a statement to go out, and we're, going to be reaching out to other organizations and the community to send our support for the people of Zimbabwe to come to unity, to find peace and unity, and to maintain our own power without bringing in any outside forces, without bringing the enemy in at our table. The other thing is that I think, as was said, we want to make sure we honor and respect President Mugabe, and honor and respect, his family, and make sure that he is there to be consulted with. But he, as a veteran of this revolutionary struggle, deserves the dignity and the respect, and we must honor that and not let the enemy come in and tell us how to deal with our own family. And I think we need to stay vigilant. We need to build a strong campaign, which we have not done, like the reparations campaign. We need to have a strong campaign, U.S. out of Africa. We need to build a strong campaign, U.S. out of Africa.
I remember that. Wouldn't it be like a revisitation? Because I remember that slogan. I remember that campaign.
But we really need to hone on, especially for real. People were popping around and saying, Niger, what are they doing in Niger when, when the brother was killed? And folks don't really understand that they're in Zimbabwe, that they're in Sudan, that they're in West Africa, that they're in,
they're trying to get Africa.
They're in Africa, and they are trying to build those AFRICOM bases that many of African leaders had pushed back. We need to build a strong campaign to make sure that the UN, not the UN, but the AU, acknowledges we need to get America out of Africa.
Let me ask you one quick question, if you can take 30 seconds or so. Just 30. Will the president, Brother Mugabe, be able to stay there? Do you see him staying there?
I see that he should be able to stay there. Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I think the power of the word, when Dr. Horne was saying, what would they do with me? That kind of pained me because the power of the word, my thought and my word is that they will honor and respect him. But again, Inshallah. It depends, it really depends on the people. And I have faith in the people, and I have faith that ZANU-PF will work out its struggle, will work out the complexities of this situation. And remember that the majority of Africa respects President Mugabe. He is the most anti-imperialist president that is on the continent, and I think Africa is going to come to his support.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You heard it from her. Africa will come to his support. This has been a great show. I've learned so much. And so thank you to our guests. Thank you, Dr. Horne, Dr. Gerald Horne. Thank you, Sister Moya Mzuri. Thank you, Brother Brian Muhammad. And again, finalcall.com. And also, there's a flyer on my Facebook page at Charlene Muhammad and my Twitter account at Sis Charlene, which has links to our guests' contact information. And so if you go to those flyers, you can get their information and follow them, support them, get their books, get their articles, what have you. I want to say thank you so much to Sister Felicia, Sister The Poetess Morris, and also the Morris Media Center, Morris Media Studios, where we're recording live. We love it here.
Yes.
First of all, hand clap.
Yes. Well done.
I love it here. Thank you so much, Sister Felicia. And so, again, radiojustice.org, Fridays at 8. Every second and fourth Saturday, kpfk.org, 90.7 FM, Liberated Sisters. You can catch me at finalcall.com. I'm Sister Charlene Muhammad saying, the minister, Louis Farrakhan's final warning to President Trump and to America, noi.org, store.finalcall.com. Get that. DVD, CD, MP3. If it's impacting our community or can uplift us as a people, let's talk about it. Peace.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes.